Alright, we finally made it into the top 10, and we're starting off with probably the most problematic and divisive entry within the MCU, Avengers Age of Ultron. It's so fascinating to me because this is a movie that is probably like any DC movie within the Marvel movie. You get people that either love this movie or hate this movie. And now I know what you're probably thinking is, how could you possibly have this movie higher than Civil War? I'll tell you why. It's for the simple fact that in any of the Joss Whedon Avengers movies, the characters are driving the plot. In any of the Russo brothers Avengers movies, the plot is driving the characters. Now, while that may not make a lot of sense, consider it from this point. What are the actual actions that drive the characters in Civil War, and is it actually directly tied to the characters? Yeah, I know Captain America is trying to save Bucky, but that's tied to his own personal inner struggle. How is that driving the actual action and tension of the Avengers getting split up because of the Sokovia Accord? As opposed to Age of Ultron, where the whole driving force of that movie is Tony Stark's overall fear that the Avengers are not going to be enough to protect the Earth when the next alien invasion comes along. Besides the fact that later movies proved him to be completely right, validating this movie even more, it's the fact that this is, to me, the only Avengers movie that actually seeks to test its characters. Now, obviously, like I said, there's a reason why I have it at 10 and not above Infinity War and Endgame. But to me, the whole interest of that first Avengers movie comes from the fact that you get all these characters together and they actually do have like some really compelling arcs in terms of just how they're gonna get along and how they're gonna discover that they're a greater part of the whole. But I feel like the interest from this movie comes from the fact that Joss Whedon, unlike the Russos, actually wants to test these characters as characters. He wants to test them. He wants to make them actually have to go through some struggle. He doesn't want to make this just another comic book blockbuster saving the world type movie. That's what the third act of this movie becomes, which is why it's the weakest part. But at least for those first 2/3 of the movie, I'm actually seeing like a lot of interesting struggles with these characters. Like, this movie still tests Tony Stark to me in a way that not a lot of any of the other movies did, because they're actually having him see some real conflict, because for the majority of the movie, you don't actually know whether there's going to be another alien invasion. So this mostly does come off as yet another example of his ego getting in the way of him trying to do the right thing. But this movie's also got some really interesting subliminal stuff with Steve Rogers, with Black Widow, with the Hulk, and obviously the MVP of this movie, Hawkeye, with the farm scene obviously being commended by a lot of people as one of the like top best moments in the MCU. And I know a lot of people have a problem with Ultron as a villain, and I fully understand where they're coming from. But compared to a majority of the villains that we had gotten overall within phase 2, Ultron was a breath of fresh air. And it's funny because even though he doesn't necessarily work as a villain, as a character, he's arguably just as interesting as any of the Avengers. Kind of how he's born out of this desire by Tony Stark to do the right thing, and he is still doing in his mind what he thinks is the right thing, but he kind of clearly knows that it's the wrong thing, and he kind of delights in it. Like, he delights in torturing the Avengers. Like, Ultron is, to me, the only MCU villain that actually enjoys being a villain. It's something that really none of the other MCU villains have, and it really does elevate him above a lot of the other more generic villains. Plus, to quote my professor from college, James Spader could read words from the dictionary and make them sound interesting. But it's a lot of interesting and risque choices that this movie takes, and it really always kills me whenever this movie gets discounted. It's like, oh, Joss Whedon screwed up, so the Russo brothers had to step in and fix everything. Like, it still shocks me how in one scene, the party scene where they all try to lift Thor's hammer, each and every single one of those characters' arcs is set up and completely fulfilled to a T. And even though, yeah, Wanda and Quicksilver probably aren't used to the best of their abilities, and it's very clear that this movie treats and the entire MCU in general treats Quicksilver like an afterthought, this is probably still like the best way that they use those characters. And having Wanda kind of be the catalyst in order to force the Avengers to deal with their own fears and insecurities. Again, it is deep stuff that this movie is dealing with. I will fully admit the third act of this movie is a steaming pile. Of all the parts of this movie that I would say that a lot of people criticize for just trying to replicate the magic of the first one, that third act is very, very much, I would say, the most glaring example. And the fact that you have a supervillain that is literally an artificial intelligence and this movie barely makes any use of the internet, again, is a tremendous missed opportunity to me. Like, it kills me how in Avengers Endgame, they choose to split up all the Avengers when this movie was clearly the movie to do that. But again, I'm not gonna nitpick the movie for what it could have been. I'm gonna take the movie as it is. And as it is to me, while being a very problematic movie, still is a great sequel and still pushes the core 6 Avengers in much different and more varied and interesting complex directions than any other future movie would. It is clearly not a better movie than any of the other Avengers movies, but for all of those interesting choices, I give this movie 4 out of 5 stars. Black Panther. This was a movie that I feel like everyone with enough common sense knew was gonna be good. But for my money, I just didn't realize just how good it was gonna be. Because even though, yes, it is problematic. I don't think this is a perfect movie. This is still without a doubt one of the best that the MCU has to offer. Purely for the fact that when I think of MCU movies that actually tried to deal with real world issues and struggles, the two examples that I always think of are Captain America: The Winter Soldier and this movie. No, this movie actually did have some really interesting perspectives to take on the idea of imperialism versus nationalism versus isolationism versus like to what extent countries should interfere in the well-being of other countries. But this is a struggle that to me, even though it was specifically from an Afro-futuristic perspective, it actually does have like a lot of impacts and real world implications. And almost, again, really impressed me, especially for this being a big budget Marvel superhero movie. So in that sense, I do kind of understand and even support why this movie got Best Picture nomination. And Black Panther, again, the unfortunate thing is that Black Panther had such an incredible introduction and arc in Civil War that it kind of does suck that in his own movie, his arc kind of comes off as uncompelling, especially when you bring the villain into it. But still, Chadwick does another supremely solid job, and Black Panther's struggle in this movie is still, like, really pretty awesome. And again, most of that is attributed to the villain, but think about it, and if anything, it makes you understand why the villain in this movie is so good. Because the villain is so good and so right about everything that he's saying that he actually makes Black Panther change his entire policy, his way of thinking about his country. But this movie to me does a great job of comparing all the different perspectives when it comes to whether they should interfere in the rest of the world because they know they have the tools and the resources in order to assist fellow people that are struggling. It's almost really strange how this movie is arguably more relevant, especially with everything that's going on today with the protests. And Killmonger, oh my god, like, if anything, because even though the MCU had pretty much established that they finally learned from their mistakes and actually knew how to make compelling villains at this point, like, Killmonger is one of the few MCU villains that to me like is so compelling that I almost don't see him as a villain. Like, I get it, I know the whole argument, every villain is a hero of their own story, but like there were certain points when Killmonger was talking and I'm like, I know you're the villain, but I'm kind of agreeing with everything that you're saying. And again, he has arguably one of the best villain backstories ever, so you understand 1000% where he's coming from. The rest of the supporting cast is great. The score, Ludwig Göransson's score for this is absolutely unbelievable. The look of Wakanda is great. And again, for this movie to be as good as it is and also still not an origin story, again, this movie is an absolutely beautiful movie. The only problem, literally the only problem that I have is how the script is paced. This movie could be a little bit tighter. There are certain chunks that they could move around, tighten up in order to make it a little bit better. But for the things that this movie is trying to stay, it works 1000%. This is where I start to up it. I give Black Panther 4.5 out of 5 stars.
Alright guys, that was my latest ranking of my MCU rankings list. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to click the like button and the subscribe button. Follow Talkin TV on all our other links. We're on Facebook and Instagram. The links are in the description below. And be sure to keep coming back for more quality content such as this. Have fun, stay safe, and as always, watch more fucking movies.